Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I can see that we already have about 30-something attendees in the meeting room. Okay, awesome. So good morning, everyone. We're just going to give a few more minutes for more people to join in. But while we're doing that, so we can just use the chat box to just share where we're joining in from, just a brief intro so that everyone can meet, so that we can meet each other. So just, hi, my name is Godfrey. I'm joining in from Lagos, Nigeria. So let's just do that while we're giving a few more minutes for more people to join in. Thank you. So just your name and where you're joining in from. Awesome. Hi, Lua Damilola. Good morning. Welcome, Loretta. Welcome, Linda. I can see Bosun from Lagos. Lagos is in the lead. So I can see Loretta, Bosun, all from Lagos. Yay. So we have Friday from Abuja. We have Desmond from Lagos. Elizabeth from Abuja as well. Bolanli from Lagos. So let's just keep the introductions going in the chat box. Just where are you joining in from? I can see someone joining in from Delta State, Nigeria. Okay, 2 people actually. Okay, so Lagos is clearly in the lead. So welcome everyone. Thank you, Adewumi, joining in from Ondo. So welcome everyone. So just in a few minutes, we're going to kickstart the session. So please let's just keep the introductions going on in the chat, and then we'll start at exactly 11:05. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's 1 more minute to 11:05, and we currently have 76 people in the room. So thank you to everyone who has joined us so far. And I think we'll just give 1 more minute, and then we'll get started. Okay, so it's 11:05. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's nice to meet you this morning. My name is Godfrey Oji. I'm a project lead at the Sterling One Foundation, and I'm excited to see all 88 people that are on the call today with us. And I'm happy to welcome you to the second edition of the ESG series. For those of us who joined us for the first edition, we must all admit that it was really an exciting and really insightful session. And today we're hoping to have something even better. That's why we have a number of experts in the room today who are going to be taking us through different topics, all geared towards helping us demystify the S in SDGs. So for some of us who were here last week, we must have learned that ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So today we're going to be focusing on the S, which stands for social. So without wasting more time, I am going to quickly welcome our first speaker, and that is the CEO of the Sterling One Foundation, Mrs. Olabiji Ibikwe. Please, can we just give a virtual round of applause as we welcome her in? Hello, Biju.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us for the second in the series of our ESG webinar. I would like to sincerely appreciate all those who have taken time out of their very busy schedules to join us today. Thank you so much. Please permit me to also sincerely appreciate our partners who have made this session today a possibility. I would like to sincerely appreciate PricewaterhouseCoopers Nigeria, Sterling Bank, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Lagos Business School Sustainability Center, and the UNIDO Investment Technology Promotion Office, Nigeria. Today, we will be speaking on demystifying the S in ESG, and we're just going to go right into it. We're going to do a brief overview of the ESG, and that's just to do a small recap of what we learned during the first in the series last month. And then we're going to go into the overview of the S, major social factors, issues, and opportunities, and one or two case studies. As for those of us that joined us the last time, I'm sure we all know that ESG is a framework used by corporate organizations, not-for-profit organizations, even governments, to be able to evaluate how well their firm is performing when it comes to ethical and sustainable metrics beyond just financial metrics. It is an accountability framework to ensure that organizations are balanced in their desires to achieve their strategic objectives, especially for profit organizations. It takes a look at how they're taking care of the natural environment, how they're taking care of their stakeholders when it comes to the social element, and how their governance structure and their governance framework is to ensure that they remain sustainable over the long term. To break it down, environmental focus assesses how a company performs as a steward of the national environment. Social focus, of course, I'd already mentioned that, how a company takes care of its different relationships with internal stakeholders, relationships with external stakeholders. Internal stakeholders include the employees. External stakeholders include suppliers, customers, and the communities where they do business. And of course, the governance takes care of the business ethics, competitive behavior, compliance with legal and regulatory provisions, and how they take care of their play when it comes to competition. This particular slide breaks it down further, and social. I intentionally included this for those that didn't join us the last time. And this is just to give some more details, a bit more details on environmental reviews. The environment includes how they measure their carbon emissions, how they ensure they manage their waste properly, how they ensure that their impact on the environment is not so significant, and how they seek to reduce the negative impact of their business operations on the environment. We all know globally we have the net zero declaration by different companies. This is to ensure that these organizations reduce the negative impact of their operations on the natural environment. And social breaks it down to labor practices. How do organizations take care of their employee health and safety? How do organizations ensure that they are inclusive, they are equitable, and they are diverse? How does an organization ensure that all the rights of its stakeholders are held up and taken care of? How does an organization take care of its different communities where they do business, local communities where they do their business? How do they ensure that the people within that community have decent work and economic growth? How do they ensure that people within that community have access to education? How do they ensure that people within that community have access to health? How do they ensure that youth within that community are empowered to be able to also be beneficial to the community? How do they take care of the data? Although some of us here will already know about the GDPR guidance, and how do they ensure that the data of their customers are safe? How do they ensure that the products they provide for their customers are in alignment with global standards, and they ensure that they deliver value consistently? And these are just some of the components of the ESG framework. I found this data really interesting, and I thought to share. A recent study from IBM Institute for Business Value found that 76% of executives say ESG is central to their business strategy. And more than 7 in 10, that's about 72%, approach it as a revenue enabler rather than a cost center. I'm using this quote to close out on our session recap for the first in the series. And the first in the series was about the business case for ESG. This is a survey report that lets us know that over 70% of executives have confirmed that ESG is essential for the success of the business strategy. It is not, I say it one more time, it is not a cost center. It is a revenue enabler. So organizations are represented in the room. Both for-profit organizations and not-for-profit organizations should take these things seriously and explore how they will integrate ESG frameworks, reporting, and practice in their operations. Now we go down to the S in ESG. The social aspect of ESG has become very important in recent times. Initially, a lot of attention was paid to the environment, especially because of the global clamor for climate action against the climate change issues happening across the globe. But social is significantly gaining relevance. Why? Most of our stakeholders have found their voice. The social media, the multiplicity of platforms, the multiplicity of knowledge sharing platforms have also ensured that these stakeholders know their rights and they are not quiet. They are now more vocal, much more vocal. And this is happening across the globe. Organizations can no longer do the wrong things anymore. People will call organizations out, and it will have implications for reputation. It will have implications for business. It will have implications for compliance issues. I was in an event yesterday and I was speaking with one of the regulatory authorities in Lagos State and Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency. And he mentioned that where organizations are not in alignment with the regulations, they seal them off. And today, the consumer has that kind of power. So organizations need to pay significant attention to the social aspect of ESG. It focuses on the company's impact on the people and society, ensuring that organizations are ethical, they are fair, and they provide positive contributions to the overall well-being. Some of the key areas under the S, the social, in ESG includes issues around decent pay, ensuring that there is fair treatment. Both genders, male and female, earn the same thing. There is no pay gap when it comes to gender remuneration. It takes care of issues around inequality. It takes care of issues around labor practice, the environment in which human resources deliver on their mandate to the organization, ensuring that the customers are satisfied consistently, ensuring that the customer is heard. And not just heard, after being heard, whatever the customer is saying, changes are made by the organization to ensure that the customer is happy. There are different units in organizations now, from customer excitement to customer happiness to customer satisfaction. Yes, it is important today and is one of the elements under the S in ESG. Product safety, community engagement, employee engagement, supply chain transparency, ensuring that organizations that are working within your value chain are also adhering to these principles. These are very, very important today for investors, because where organizations do not align to this, it means that it is a risk issue for investors. It means that that organization may really not be sustainable. It's also critical for regulators and stakeholders. The components of the S for ESG include employee well-being, prioritizing the employee to ensure that the employee is happy, is comfortable, is satisfied, is well engaged to be able to deliver at the maximum productivity level and to reduce turnover and attrition within an organization. Another component of the S is compliance with human rights regulations and stipulations, and the standards, local and global human rights standards. Engagement of the community, I think already emphasized that, ensuring that there's a strong relationship, strong alignment, strong partnership with the community. I recall sometime recently when there was issues on, I will use the word EndSARS. I recall there were some stories about some communities, some estates, that the people within that community protected the inhabitants of the estate just because somewhere along the line, the people within that estate have taken care of the S. They have been socially responsible. They have been socially sensitive. Those things come up and they are very important. That's why you see when there are issues within communities, some companies are safe. The people within that community will protect the company, whereas some companies are exposed and they are vandalized and they lose a lot of their investment because community engagement has been poor. Community engagement is it's a big work of body of knowledge. So we have charitable giving, we have employee volunteering, we have corporate philanthropy, and so many other elements of that community engagement, and of course, customer loyalty. There are various social considerations when it comes to the S, but they vary when it comes to their application in your organization. We can see human rights and modern slavery is a consideration. We have diversity and inclusion in the workforce is a consideration. Supply chain and administration and distribution, is a consideration. Product quality, service quality is a consideration. Social reporting is a consideration. Culture and the organizational culture and behavior is a consideration. Health and safety, the well-being of the human resources within your organization is a consideration. And the impact of capital projects, considering the interaction between social environment, is also a consideration. This depends on your organization. Some organizations do not need to engage all of these social considerations. So depending on what you do within your organization, all these are elements, components of the S in ESG. For financial services organizations, there are considerations. For manufacturing, you find that human rights and modern slavery is usually a consideration for organizations that do a lot of manufacturing. But depending on your organization, these are considerations for you when it comes to the S in ESG. This is a quote from the United Nations Global Compact. Directly or indirectly, companies affect what happens to employees, workers in the value chain, customers, and local communities. And it is important to manage this impact proactively. I will run through now the major social factors and their impact. Social equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'll run through this. These slides will be made available to all those in the room for us to go read and understand these concepts more. But because of our time, I will run through the rest of the slides. Community engagement and participation, access to essential resources and services. And these are the issues and opportunities. Social challenges within the ESG framework when it comes to the S. Assessment of social impact. There are diverse metrics and reporting frameworks. So when it comes to standard assessment of social impact across industries, that might be an issue for consideration. Resource constraints. I've met so many organizations and corporate responsibility leads in organizations that have mentioned that they want to do so much, but there is a limit when it comes to the resources available to address these issues. That can be an issue also when it comes to the S. Balancing expectations, balancing the needs of the various stakeholders is also an issue when it comes to the S in the ESG framework, and of course, regulatory compliance. There are several opportunities. Innovation, but I'll just highlight three for the purpose of this session. Innovation and growth. When you allow employees to be able to give their best, when employees within an organization are given the opportunity to be able to express themselves, to bring their best self to work, you are definitely going to experience innovation. These inclusive practices, they lead to diverse perspectives. They give opportunity for you to get different perspectives to be able to ensure that whatever solution you're providing for the market has excellent quality and is well thought through. So this gives rise to increase profitability. I know of different solutions that have come into the market because of the opportunity that the organization has given to the employees to innovate and to think differently and to grow. Of course, when an organization aligns with the regulatory requirements, when an organization provides value for its communities, provides value for its staff, it has an enhanced reputation. People believe more in that organization. Actually, and there is data, just not in this slide, that over 80% of Gen Z are interested in working with organizations that give back to society in one way or the other. Today, the workforce of today is not just interested in financial remuneration. The workforce of today, they want to be fulfilled. They want to give back. So it helps to enhance your reputation as an organization when you identify and address social issues within your community, especially issues that these employees or these communities are passionate about. That's where stakeholder engagement comes in. And of course, it's a proactive risk management tool. If we're going to refer to that quote from the United Nations Global Compact, it's proactively addressing social risks that can mitigate losses, not just financial losses, but reputational loss. And in some cases, a complete end of some businesses. So it is critical for all organizations, both for profit, non-for-profit, not-for-profit, and governments today. I will highlight a few case studies, and this was during COVID-19, and I'm highlighting CACOVID. It was a private sector coalition against COVID-19, and various private sector organizations came together to make this happen, to support the community. We also have the One Health Workers Fund, which was created to support health workers on the front line in isolation centers across the country. These are initiatives to support the community. And at the time, several infrastructures were built, isolation centers were built across the country to ensure that most people did not have to be exposed to the COVID-19 virus. Also, one of our partners for this initiative, Sterling Bank, has also established various initiatives to support women. Some of this is the momship program recently. Women that were taken out of their career path because they had to take care of the little ones were given opportunity to come back into their careers by Sterling Bank. There's also maternal support for staff. I know that at the time, Sterling Bank had free creche for newborns. So as a staff of Sterling Bank and you just had a baby, for the first 18 months of that child's life, Sterling Bank was providing creche for free for all babies of their staff. And I thought that was really, really fantastic at the time. And I also know that before COVID ever came to, before we know what we know today as remote work options, there was flexible place and flexible time where staff could work from anywhere. Today, I know not just Sterling Bank, several organizations within Nigeria and I believe across the globe have remote work options where your human resources can work permanently out of anywhere, actually even out of the country where the office is located, and even from home. I know that currently exists today, and quite a number. And the one that was also interesting was support for side hustles. And this is to ensure that the human resources are fully satisfied with their employer. We also have what Sterling One Foundation is doing. But what I would want to highlight is Sterling One Foundation, we are both practical and visionary. We enable transformational change as conveners and catalysts. We also prioritize galvanizing partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. We provide opportunity for different organizations that want to do more when it comes to social impact. There's several initiatives that you can be a part of across different areas and different sectors, including health, education, climate action, food security, gender equality, that we can partner with you on when it comes to your community initiatives. For the other initiatives, when it comes to what you're doing for your human resources under the S, my recommendation is organizations that do not have it yet should have a diversity and inclusion policy, should set up policies across these different elements and abide by those policies. And on that note, I would like to say thank you so much for listening, and I'll leave you with this quote by Alex Edmonds. The most successful companies do not target profit directly, but are driven by purpose, the desire to serve a societal need and contribute to human betterment. Thank you so much for listening. I'm open for questions and we'll take questions later. Over to you, Godfrey.
Thank you so much, Biju, for that recap and also taking us through like a brief intro. And that I think that has set the ball rolling for the next speaker that we're going to have. So thank you so much for those providing those salient points on the S in SDGs. So just a few house rules, right? We're going to have the Q&A session at the end of all the speakers' sessions. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A button to drop your questions. You can also interact with other people or share some of your thoughts within the chat group. So without wasting more time, we're going to quickly welcome our next speaker. Our next speaker is an EX is a partner at PwC, and it's PwC's Africa ESG tax leader. She heads the people and organization unit and tax responsible for reward strategies and structure in global mobility and personal compliance services to companies in various industries. She has a wealth of experience in international trade and sustainability considerations. She offers strategic guidance to organizations navigating the complexities of global trade and sustainability. So please let's welcome Esiri Abeyi.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. A pleasure to be here, everyone. And thank you, Pedro, as well, for a very nice intro on the topic. So what I'm going to do now is share my slides. I don't know if I have sharing rights, Godfrey. I do have.
Yes, you do, Siri.
All right, thank you. So while we're on it, I mean, I absolutely loved, the intro on just breaking down what S is about. And I think what I'll try to do is perhaps take this in a direction of what reporting should be like, the reporting landscape, and then look at what's important, what's making the rounds in terms of the regulatory frameworks too. As we all know, this is a very big alphabet soup with so many regulatory frameworks coming up, left, right, center. And what you tend to find is perhaps there's some sort of confusion as to what needs to be focused on, but there are shared standards and there are overlaps in that sense that I think one needs to then take into consideration. I don't know if my screen is now showing.
Yes, it is a Siri.
All right, so I'll just make it slideshow and then we can go on. So what we'll try to do is just maybe go through a case study on the S and basically how we drive the S agenda, but then focus on the reporting requirements. I think a quote, worth mentioning is that people's choices and behaviors will determine the trajectory of our collective transition to a sustainable world. And I like to look at the S as pretty much the fulcrum between the E and the G. The joint you have in your elbow, the S is actually what connects the E and the G together. And at the end of the day, if we're talking about moving to a green world, there's no way you can do it without people. So it's important that we're also looking at how this impacts on people. And there are basically 4 buckets that we'll look at as we go. And this is how the regulations are also taking shape as well. So we had a slide like this in terms of the 3 pillars of ESG, the factors to consider, with social being the primary thing that we're focusing on for this session. And then if you look at this, it breaks it down into several buckets. But I think maybe when we go into the next slide, we start to see how this become important. If you look at the first pillar here, it looks like your human capital. What do you have in terms of human capital, and what are the issues to pay attention to? Why is it even important to pay attention to these issues is something that we would also focus on. So you see things like labor management making its round, health and safety as well, human capital development. Why is that important? And I think also the transition, into that green space is something that requires deeper thought in terms of how it affects our people, whether from a pay standpoint, but also the kind of exposure you might have in terms of human rights. Why is human rights an issue here? If you're moving into a green space, it means that there is a probability that jobs will change. And we're already beginning to hear that with the transition to AI. Once you start to lay off people, it becomes a big issue. There was a picture I was going to post here where we had the senior executives of the France Airways try to jump over a fence because they had been disturbed at a senior executive management meeting where they had decided to lay off about 2,900 staff in France. And the French, they're very clear on what it is that they want. And there was chaos in the executive room, the boardroom, where you saw their shirts even torn to that extent. And just imagine the kind of reputational damage that can have on a company where you see board members just trying to scale a fence. So we probably haven't gotten to that in Nigeria, but these trends are important to follow. There's also the talk about product liability, stakeholder opposition, what are community relations like? And in a country like Nigeria, where we are very commodity rich, this is something that requires a lot of importance. I like the fact that Pedro also alluded to that in her discussion, and it's something we'll see as well as we go into the regulations around this area. Social opportunities too would be something that you want to consider under the social, with tax as a social contract. We love to say that word, but not so many people love to think about tax in that way. So this is something that we will also spend some time on. Now, when you look at the concept of corporate sustainability, it's a quite broader mandate. The ESG metrics or the ESG pillars kind of focus you on the key issues that you want to take into consideration. But at the heart of it, the companies are the ones who are going to be first hit by this sustainability drive. Why? Because the companies are the ones that have pretty much the biggest impact on the communities at large. And so if we're able to address the companies from that lens, then it feels like we are making progress. So you'd see here on this slide, you see all of the stakeholders that are basically revolving around this company. And then you start to see through the lens of that company what people issues or stakeholder mandates they need to think about. But you can also see on the last circle here, the stakeholders who are driving or influencing the kind of narrative that the company now needs to push through when it comes from a corporate sustainability standpoint. So do you have an accurate understanding of the actions and the opinions of these stakeholders? Do you have an accurate and good understanding of the influencers around them. So basically 2 levels of understanding that's required, one for the influencers and then one for the stakeholders that are very close to the company's activities. Now, what it means is that the way we always knew a company's reporting to be, where it's almost like we want to report profit, is now going over and beyond that to say it's not just about the financial numbers. We now need to think about the non-financial numbers because we have a target. And this also is, resident in the Paris Agreement that Nigeria has committed to in form of our net zero targets, where we're saying we want to reduce climate change. But we know that this also has an impact on our people. To the extent that we don't solve this issue, a lot of lives will be lost. But then we also see that a lot of job opportunities will be affected. And it's how do we manage that change? So you'll start to hear things like just transitioning coming on board. I wanted to show this kind of big picture and big map of the sustainability trends that we're seeing. And because this session is talking about the S in ESG, what are those S issues that have been making the rounds? If you see from 2013, in pink, you see pink is highlighted human rights issues. Because at the end of this whole thing, when you talk about people, it's really the rights that the people have at the end of the day. If we're going to lay off a huge number of people in any retrenchment cycle, how are you protecting their human rights? Because again, that's probably what's going to make it round from a reputational standpoint when you think of non-financial information and how NGOs can use it either to their advantage or to the disadvantage of the companies. And so you started to see from 2013 suppression of NGOs, activists, and journalists making its round here. As you go forward, that issue continues to appear. And then you see general human rights also becoming center point from 2014. But then as you go down to 2021, you see all these issues pile themselves up. And there's pushback definitely from the NGOs, activists, and journalists saying, we want to report these issues, but then there is a brick wall sometimes with the companies, and it's just how do we make that confluence point? Now, one of the key things we also tend to see are things around how companies perhaps are making so much money and impoverishing countries and even continents. So you'd see reports like, oh, they're setting up structures in tax havens and taking out most of the profits that could have been used to sustain that economy or community. And the NGOs are reporting these things. This is some of the things that are driving the standards that we're seeing in the sustainability space as it relates to social issues. Now, to put this into 4 key buckets, that every one of us should go away with when it comes to the S of ESG. One is your workforce, the people that matter. One is your supply chain, because at the end of the day, when you want to think about how human rights are protected as well, but also how you're affecting the environment at large, you can't just stop at yourself as a corporation. You need to look at the entire supply chain, tier 1 suppliers, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers as well. And when you look in here at this bucket, you see things like modern slavery, child labor, and forced labor being highlighted. Now, I'll give an example. Nigeria or West Africa is a region that is blessed with cocoa. Cocoa is one of the big products for chocolates, primary or raw material for the chocolates that we see. But guess what? Only 5% of the global world value of cocoa or the chocolate that you see on the shelves comes down to Africa. Most of it is situated in the countries that are producing the chocolates. A lot of NGOs are speaking up. Fair trade, they're speaking up and saying, look, you're impoverishing the farmers who are planting this cocoa, who are bringing it out from the soil. And so what's tending to happen is that a lot of organizations who are now behind all the chocolates that we love to consume are now under the spotlight. And that spotlight is asking questions around the entire supply chain down to where the cocoa is being gotten from. How traceable is it? Are we sure that you're not employing children to harvest the cocoa? How are you treating those farmers? How are you giving back the full value of the chocolate price that you're getting to the hands of the farmers who are bringing out this cocoa from the soil? And those things speak to child labor, they speak to human rights preservation. And so for any investor who is coming from a European perspective to invest in any company that is in Nigeria, it then becomes an issue that that Nigerian company must think about, because you can imagine that investors will shy away from such investments where they feel that the farms are maybe labored by children, or there is, some slavery, modern slavery in quotes on there, where people are working day and night, overtime is not compensated for, and then you're just exploiting man hours. This is a very big issue, and it's something that the EU is driving, and it's definitely, like I said before, these global sustainability trends will become very localized. So it's important that we follow those trends. And then we have the customers as well, where we start to talk about health and safety and how you can even potentially have these litigations. And then lastly, you have the community. So these are the four primary buckets you want to envision when you're thinking about the people that are impacted by the S in ESG. The cross-cutting theme is your just transition. If we're moving now from perhaps exploiting fossil fuels into a greener economy, what's at risk? The risk is that we then would not need certain jobs, and then certain companies in these fossil fuel industries will disappear. But the reality is that in Africa, where we are very commodity rich and haven't contributed as much to the climate change, the question is being asked about energy dependency versus energy sufficiency before we start to move into the green energy. Where we have to make drastic measures, a lot of jobs will be lost. And it's important that we have to strike a balance. And this is where the theme around just transition comes in. And that balance is not only from a litigative perspective, but it's also from an economic standpoint. How do we preserve our economy, the GDP contribution that we had previously gotten from these fossil fuel companies as we transit into the green? And so a lot of activity is required from companies to report not only their transition roadmaps, but also start to actively, in that sense, accelerate the use of fossil fuels in improving our industrialization in Africa or in Nigeria, if I use that as an example. So just transition is a cut-crossing theme across all of this when we talk about climate change. There are definitely opportunities arising from this. So it's not really to look at it as a risk, but to look at the opportunity for change that behoves on this. And you'd see the same buckets I talked about: workforce, your customer, your community, your supply chain. All of this at the end of the day are underlined by the human rights that are protected as we transit. But then every one of them is speaking to how we're meeting our SDGs in this map. So this shows a direct connect, and it's helping us also meet our net zero goals as a country towards 2060. Therefore, there's a very close connection there that companies must pay attention to. So this identifies the key bodies that are defining the human rights and also defining some of the standards that you are reporting on, including the International Labour Organization Human Rights Framework, and then the United Nations as well. They are defining a lot of what we're seeing in the human rights space. And for a typical due diligence, a due diligence will happen if an investor wants to invest in a company and be sure that they're not at risk of any of these standards, especially from the EU standpoint, because they have now a lot of mandatory reporting requirements. They would be looking at it through this lens as well. So the reporting landscape is bigger, or the framework surrounding what you'll be reporting on is bigger. So your social pillar is about committing to and respecting human rights. And if you recall, I mentioned these four buckets that you shouldn't forget as you go. Now, in terms of the just transition elements, I think I kind of focused on that. When you're looking at a decarbonization strategy, and I'm using this more as an example, even though just transition, sometimes you're picturing just moving or transiting from renewable energy. It's also even the use of technology and AI. As we start to use up more technology, a lot of talk is, a lot of jobs are going to be lost. how do we replace those jobs? It's really around upskilling. How do we upskill to now get into those new jobs that would rely on technology? And so your just transition consideration, if you're transiting, whether it's to renewable energy or a more tech-enabled organization, is what will be the impact on workers, for introducing low carbon technologies and processes? What kind of training do we need? What kind of career development is required? For emissions abatement, as we incorporate abatement technology in high emitting activities, what opportunities are there to redevelop or repurpose assets to a lower emitting activity? That would require knowledge and skills as well. And so this raises a lot of questions that you need to think about from different perspectives, so that as you report, your reporting is a lot more robust, and then you don't become the weak link within the organization that causes an organization, one, to lose out on investment deals, two, to have a shrink in their share price or stock price, and three, at the end of the day, this directly impacts also on the earnings that you make from that organization. So it's really about losing that tunnel vision and just expanding it to a more broader perspective that looks at all of this. It looks too wide, but these are things that you can center within the 4 buckets that I remember. Don't forget them in terms of the people that we're bothered about: the communities, the consumers, the employees, and your workforce. Now, in terms of fairness in workplace, these are questions that I want to leave you with to also think about and ask yourself questions of this. Unfortunately, we don't have a very strong labor act in Nigeria, but it doesn't mean that the world is sleeping. These are general questions that are being asked, and certifications are happening in this space around fair workers as well. So look at it in these 4 buckets: distributive issues, in terms of how fairness takes its variety of forms. There are procedural issues, there are informational issues, and interpersonal issues. And on a distributive perspective is to say, are the outcomes of your decisions fair? Am I winning or losing? What is power, prestige, money, or time? What does that have to do in terms of the decisions that I'm making, and how fair does it sound to the public, but also to my workforce? In terms of the way you also make the decisions, how is that process fair? Is it bias-free? Am I making decisions that just suit more men than women? Are the decisions even properly explained as well? What kind of policies do you have in place? And just so you know, these are the kind of questions that investors are also asking. What kind of human rights policies do you have? What is your staff policy looking like? What is the contracting looking like? So from an informational perspective, also something to consider and report on. From an interpersonal perspective, are people treated fairly? Is everyone being treated with politeness, dignity, and respect? It comes down to the values that the organization also espouses. So you would see that at the end of the day, these are things that you already probably have some building blocks on. But what the S in ESG is telling you to do is go a bit further to question some of those and put it within the context of this. So it takes you on a journey from strategy to reporting. Now, what's the value of the non-financial information that we're talking about? I started from purpose beyond profit, and this is what companies are now looking at. But what's really driving them is, as you would see on this side, is there's a lot of push now from asset owners, whether it's big pension funds that are investing in any of the institutions that we have now in Nigeria, or even asset management institutions that are now redeveloping or redefining the investment rationale. That has a direct impact on the companies. And so your integrated report looks something like a combination of your financial information, but the non-financial information down to your management philosophy or vision, your growth story, your business model, the opportunities and risks, the governance structure in terms of how those decisions are made, and the commitment from the top. These all equate to the insight into the future, as opposed to what we used to have before with financial information, where there is a lot more emphasis on the past and present. But this non-financial information will be pushing you into what's the new business model of the organization and how is that underpinned by values. I thought to highlight 2 key headlines here on how these are also making their rounds. Look at this left-hand side, 39% of Nigerian children engaged in child labor. What organizations are impacted by this? And some of the naming and shaming will still continue as we go forward. Sustainability of cocoa in Nigeria, preventing worst case scenarios. How Nigeria lost 178 billion to tax evasion by multinationals, FIRS boards. That's just in Nigeria here. So non-financial information is a big necessity to investors. And this is also what's driving the narrative and shaping or framing the conversation on S. I'd leave this with you. This slide, you'll get them, reporting why now, and then maybe just go very quickly to some of the reporting frameworks. This is the big picture for what your regulatory looks like as it relates to S. Now, like I alluded to before, the EU is driving most of these discussions, and you see the CSRD taking a big space here. The CSRD, Corporate Social Responsibility, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, is really very wide-fold and is requiring a lot of EU companies with even their subsidiaries home and abroad to start to do a lot more reporting on the S. And some of those questions I painted before are some of the things that the standards are now requiring. The big standards in this space are the ESRS, and we'll look at that in a bit. Nigeria, on the other hand, is adopting the IFRS. And so you might find that EFRAG is the one that's issuing out the ESRS standards, which you'd see here. The ESRS is underpinned by the Global Reporting Initiative standards. These have been used to develop the CSRD. So you see at some point I'll mention GRI 207, which is looking at providing guidance on the tax reporting side, because there is a big connect between also your tax and your socials. Then you see on this side, the IFRS, which is being built upon by TCFD recommendations. There's a big reporting landscape or regulatory framework in sustainability, but we need to narrow it down somehow. So the EU is taking most of these and entrenching this into their CSRD from GRI. IFRS, on the other hand, is entrenching most of what we get from TSFD. 88% of the recommendations in TSFD are covered by these draft ESRS disclosure requirements. So there is an overlap. So, and there will be some consistency between the two standards. So at the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, there's still some interoperability between the two standards that will make you stand tall and strong before any investor the world over if you adopted IFRS. So they're a bit connected. It's just that IFRS has not made the long journey that the ESRS has made. ESRS has about 20 standards, but IFRS has now issued about 2 standards, S1 and S2, and Nigeria is early adopting as well. So this is another picture that kind of gives you a landscape of everything, mandatory reporting in the EU. And then you see that some of these standards are voluntary as it relates to the EU. And in Nigeria, like I said before, the IFRS is what we're adopting. Now, the standards under IFRS have not really fully evolved, but we do have social standards under the ESRS. And like you say, I've made that connect between the two. TCFD feeds into ESRS as well. And that TCFD also feeds into IFRS. So we're still good from a general perspective on terms of what we need to report on social. Now, these 4 key standards are the ones you need to remember when it comes to social. S1 looks at your workforce. S2 looks at the workers in the value chain. Standard 3 looks at the affected communities. Standard 4 looks at the consumers and end users. And you see everything that's required here. Under working conditions, what kind of employment do you have? Is it secured? Or these are just fleeting employment contracts where you can just lay off someone very easily? These are the kind of questions that investors are asking for. What's the working time like? Are we working people overtime and not paying them? Are the wages adequate? What kind of social dialogue are you having? How are you imbibing also the associations in that jurisdiction and what they require of, whether it's NLC today or maybe some thrift organization within the industry that, will drive collective bargaining. What's the work-life balance like, and what is health and safety like? What kind of ISOs have you complied with as well? What equal treatment and opportunities are available for all? And that goes to gender equality. I remember that WIMBIS at some point created a gender equality scorecard, which I would encourage, companies online to also look at, to start to improve on the reporting in this area. Because guess what? Whether we like it or not, this is here to stay. And these same standards that we're seeing under the ESRS are going to also be part of what we see under the IFRS. So it's important that we're also following through on that narrative. And then the last but not the least, other work-related rights, including child labor, forced labor, adequate hosting, and privacy. I think Pedro also mentioned that earlier. So there are a lot of opportunities. This is not to scare, but I think it's really the opportunity in the new world that we're going into. There's something that's called the principle of cognitive dissonance. When people are not comfortable with a subject, they tend to create reasons to justify why that would not make sense. But there is another perspective of saying, as new trends come up, there is an opportunity to lean in, and bring out opportunities from those. And I think that's where I want to encourage everyone to be at, to lean in, to be open to some of these diverse ideas that are coming through. Because at the end of the day, if you look back in time, at some point we used to use cassette players to listen to music. Who would have thought that at some point we'll be listening to it on an Apple platform and not have to go to a shop to buy a CD, but just listen to it without even having to bring up money from your pocket. So the opportunities are immense, ranging from, as it relates to workforce, what kind of strategy do you have, and how is that strategy aligned with the ESG strategy of the organization? There are different stakeholders usually within organizations that are responsible for things. And sometimes you could have, there's a disconnect with even the chief sustainability officer. Is just making sure that they all connect, including also the tax reporting around that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational fairness, executive compensation as well. This also brings to bear some of the tax structuring that can be had, and making sure that they are not too aggressive that could call the company out in terms of any reputational risk. Mental health and well-being, and then of course, upskilling. From a supply chain perspective, there are opportunities as well. What's our policy design and governance like? How are we ensuring that the supply chain risk assessment is happening and that we're doing our proper due diligence to identify suppliers that should not be within the value chain because they could cause us a lot more risk than necessary? How are they sourcing their raw materials? What kind of checklist do you have in place to ask those questions so that when it comes to social impact measurement and reporting, it then becomes easier for you? In terms of your workforce as well, these kind of questions need to be asked. Sorry, I think I'm going back. And I think the last one I want to just talk through is perhaps the Global Reporting Initiative on taxes. Taxes are a social contract between government and its people. And these are the things that will drive, the investment in healthcare, education, and infrastructure that we need, whether it means meeting our SDGs or even increasing our economic contribution and GDP contribution. Now, the tax contract, as you know, in Nigeria, we're going through a huge tax reform right now. And one of the key things to ask is there going to be any equity and wealth redistribution with a change in our tax laws? Because at the end of the day, these are things that investors are asking about and needs to be reported on as well. The GRI initiative gives you a platform for how to report on these when it comes to tax and socials. And it just runs through 4 different perspectives: your approach to tax, what's your governance, control, and risk management like, what's your stakeholder engagement and management of concerns related to tax, and then your country by country reporting as well. How much taxes are you paying in the different countries, and how does that link back to the people that are working there? Do you just have a shell entity and then you're not paying taxes as much, but just using that shell entity to collect profits and domicile them in a jurisdiction where you don't pay taxes. Why is that important? Because to the extent that you do that, then you impoverish another nation, and then you get into the spotlight for all this reputational risk that we're talking about. So reporting on that angle is also very important, because tax is then connected to the sustenance of the society that we're looking at, which, like I recall, S is the fulcrum of your E and your G. It's very important that that stays mobile. And so those are questions that will continue to come up. This shows you the roadmap for our IFRS standards so far in Nigeria. I just leave that here. You get the slides as well. And I've just decided to spotlight some of what we're seeing in terms of social reporting. You see their Chevron reporting on their workplace diversity, their racial equity strategy, and their community engagement. Great reporting there. See some of what Shell is also doing. These are companies that in the spotlight, especially because of their investment in fossil fuels, but you see how they're also making efforts to try and improve on the S side of things. You see Cadbury, they're reporting also on their workplace diversity and some of the big initiatives that they've taken on board, including their racial equity strategy. And this just kind of puts together the key priorities of stakeholders in ESG. For regulators, it's really about transparency and accountability. We've talked a lot about investors and financiers. For international organizations, it's promoting the global standards, and like you see, GRI, TCFD, ISSB, all of these organizations are trying to unify the platform for reporting. Supply chain is how do we promote products that align with ESG values. Labor unions are advocating for fair wages. Management and executives are the ones that are left with this social responsibility and needs to definitely encourage employee engagement and community involvement. What I think I'd love to just leave here as well is just key questions that you want to start asking as you embark on this journey to get it right. It's going to be a journey, whether you like it or not. You can't just start and become perfect overnight. And I like the fact that we're doing all these webinar series to kind of expose some of what is going on globally, but what needs to happen locally as well. And these are the buckets that you can ask the questions. One key question that I want to just leave you with is, in terms of your workforce, at least from a local landscape and your local communities, what are you doing about making it right? What are the working conditions? At least start with that as well. What are the skills and talent that you need as the company is now changing their business model? How are you assisting your local communities? Does your investment provide maximum benefit to the local communities around? What is your social performance strategy like? So that at the end of the day, you're able to measure real impact that matters to investors and the wider stakeholders. So I think I've run out of time. 30 minutes, or do I still have a bit more time?
Hi, so you have just two minutes left.
2 minutes, okay. So I think this is a good way to just kind of end it. Maybe what I need to do is just like leave those standards on there so you can see them. But you will get these slides anyway. See them, and let's just kind of wrap this in one good solid thing, because this has a lot of information, and what we don't want is to leave anyone behind in terms of, what are those key buckets I need to take away with. And I think the way the ESRS frames it is very useful to remember. And at the end of it, underlying all of this is human rights, protecting human rights. What's the impact that this is going to have if I don't do it right? It's really the reputational risk, the risk of not meeting even those financial goals that you've identified, and the risk of even just going bust as well. So I would say that ESG is not so much of a philosophy in that sense. It's now kind of changing the narrative in which businesses would do business going forward and into the future. And these are some of the buckets that are now being highlighted as being important. One, what is the condition like with your workforce? You must report on that. Who are the workers in your value chain, your supply chain, from the first tier suppliers to your third tier suppliers as well. The communities at large, where you work, what are the rights that you are, protecting as it relates to those communities? What kind of strategy do you have for the host communities where you're working? If you set up a plant today, how does it affect the livelihoods of those around you? In terms of pollution, what is the risk of pollution? What's the risk that they might not have any sustenance because of the situation of your plants there? And how are you giving back to society? Sometimes we just see it as one small section in your financials where you say CSR, donation to this committee, donation to that committee. But at the end of the day, what you really want to be mindful of is the impact that those donations are making. And so the reporting is now not about the numbers, but about the impact as well. And then the last one would be the consumers and end users, that last bucket. So all of these are connected by the human rights. And like I said, the ILO is one of the frameworks that's defining some of those. So sometimes you'd also see that even private equity funds and big financiers like the IFC are being guided by performance standards and checklists that will be asking questions such as these. And we see that on a regular, in PwC, with the work that we do, we're opportuned to be part of some of these due diligences as well. And we know the kind of questions that are coming through. And at the end, that non-financial information that you're putting out there is pretty much what's going to drive the answers that your investors or other stakeholders come to. So it's highly important that what you're reporting not only meets this kind of caps that have been defined in the standards, but also exceeds it, so that you are not caught wanting when it comes to, whatever it is you're seeking to achieve in the community at large. So I think I'll stop there and then be very happy to take on the questions in the broader session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Asiri. From the chat box, it's clear that this has been quite insightful for a lot of our attendees. So thank you so much for a lot of the insights that you've shared, really, and tips. So would be welcoming our next speaker, and she would also take, after our session, she would also take part of the Q&A. So once again, thank you very much. Now, the third speaker for the day, our third speaker for the day is a management consultant. She's an author. She's a management executive, an author, a consultant, and an academic who is passionate about the sustainable development and transformation of African economies and communities. She leads sustainability at the prestigious Lagos Business School and serves as a lead facilitator, designing and delivering sessions on sustainability in business and circular economy at the LBS Sustainability Center, Enterprise Development Center, and the Nigerian Climate Innovation Center. In her leadership of the LBS Sustainability Center, Oreva leads the globally recognized knowledge hub, supporting organizations and leaders across sectors to positively impact society and integrate sustainability and ESG practices. So please, let's just welcome Oreva Atanya, the head of sustainability at the Lagos Business School.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
Awesome, awesome. So my session is more of tying together the impact. So I think Pedro and Asiri have made my job very easy with what they've shared with us since morning. Okay, so I have an updated version of that. So if you can stop sharing from there and I'll share from here. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So first, I really want to thank the organizers and partners for this open knowledge session. I think it's so insightful and I think it's been so well put together. So congratulations to the team. I know a lot of work has gone on the background putting this together. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to do a summary at first. And then I'm also going to share some insight about the future trends, things that are likely to be coming up out of this particular part of the ESG, which is the social that we focused on. And then I will also then moderate the Q&A. All right. So can you confirm my slide is up? Do I need to put it inside?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So Peju nicely set the tone from the background. I just want to highlight some things that she said. She showed us this map of these quadrants that really showed some of the elements. And then she left us with a quote about the most successful companies. So sometimes a lot of these ESG and sustainability conversations we're having, especially in the context of emerging markets, developing markets like we are in Nigeria, it sometimes seems like information overload. But I like that she pointed out that major social factors and their impacts that at least anyone can start with is looking at the social equity, diversity and inclusion issues related to their business, the community engagement and participation at that external stakeholder level, and also access to essential services and resources. And she pointed out a very interesting case study of CACOVID, and I wanted to pull this picture up, looking at how eventually CACOVID was recognized as one of the third largest intervention outside of government around the control and survival of communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Siri went into all the details. If I didn't even have enough, I couldn't collect enough of the things that you were saying to summarize, but I wanted to point out this 4 stakeholder groups that she said we should not forget as far as implementing the S part of your ESG strategy, which is around your employees, consumers, communities, and she said workforce. And I wanted to add that element of the supply chain and value chain, because like she said, even as we look at the just transition, as a lot of business models are going to change, a lot of production and manufacturing priorities will be changing in terms of use of energy, use of different types of resources, reuse of different resources. You will find that it affects supply chains and workforces that are not just within a particular business, but around it. And then she pointed us as well to the trends in regulation, particularly in Nigeria, our adoption of the IFRS standards as something that we have a limited amount of time for all companies to get used to and start preparing to report on their non-financial performance. And also she made a very clear case for understanding the relationship between tax and ESG as the social contract. So key considerations I want to leave, and I actually got this interestingly for PwC, so it's nice that I'm following this session, is that at the end of the day, all this is underwritten by the need to protect human rights. Human rights, human rights, human rights. The need to protect human rights through our business, through our development, even as we are transitioning, right? So I'll leave you with that. And then also the frameworks that we've already alluded to, but I wanted to bring out these 3. One, the ESRS, the social standards that are part of the ESRS, and she already left us with that slide at the end. And then within our own context, we've already adopted the IFRS. So every company, every executive, anyone responsible for the performance of the business has to be looking at how they're going to prepare to engage and integrate it into strategy now, so that you actually have something to report on by the time it becomes mandatory. And then she also alluded to the elements in the GRI standards, whether you're reporting in accordance with it or in reference to the GRI standards. That is actually a very good starting point for any firm. And I put there an example of a materiality map to get us thinking about how this then moves into the strategic part of the business, so that it informs processes, decisions, and day-to-day management. And really is to start seeing that some of these S issues around the social components, social impact, social footprints of our businesses are not just looked as things that are moderate, because in our context particularly, they are actually becoming quite high. So I want to show this 5 sustainability clouds. So this is something that came out of a study we did here at the business school, led by Professor Chris Ogbiche. And we've identified that poverty and social justice, which really encompasses a lot of the social and human rights issues, a huge cloud when it comes to the social outcomes and social footprints. Not just that it will affect businesses themselves, or that investors and different stakeholders will be asking businesses what their performance is on those issues, but the fact that we call it clouds is that these are main issues that will actually impact as risk on everyone, from non-profit organizations to governments to for-profit businesses. And then looking at the predictions for the future trend, I think even while Peju and Esiri were presenting, there was already an inclining to looking at these 4 particular areas. This is not exhaustive, but there are things that are already quite clear in the next 5, 10, 20 years, looking at workplace and marketplace, in this case, your value chain. We can't see my slides. Oh, I hope you can see it. Godfrey, can you confirm that you can see the slides? I proceed. Let me know if that's just
yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, so
one trend.
Okay, one trend looking forward, the marketplace and workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. So more and more businesses, and even whether you're non-profit or for-profit, you'll be asked this question around what the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues are around your operations and your impact, and specifically not just in your workplace, but also in the value chain. So I wanted to bring that out. So when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, it even goes beyond just, okay, the gender diversity within your workforce, within management and boards, but how even your operations and your impacts either enable that or actually deter that. Community engagement and the impacts of those engagements, So really, we've moved beyond that phase of philanthropy or giving back to society for the sake of giving back alone, or to be seen to be giving back. Now there are actual real questions about what the impact of those investments are. And those questions are coming both from the board or the management who's approving this spend for social and community investments, also to the stakeholders, whether shareholders or even government, who's saying, okay, if you've done this amount of philanthropy, of social engagement, how has that moved the needle on certain SDGs or development outcomes, even if it's specific to those communities that are your primary stakeholders. And then supply chain resilience. Going back to...
Hi, Reva.
Yes.
Hi, Reva. Please, you just want to take a minute to stop sharing the slides and start resharing
and try
it
again. Okay.
Yes, I think we have more people who can see the slides. So apologies to those who can see the slides. Reva will just sort that out shortly. Thank you.
All right. Oh, Godfrey, you can try and share from your end to just that particular slide. Predictions for social components of ESG. But I'm sure everyone can see it.
Okay. I will doing that just now.
Okay. Thank you. So I was speaking about the supply chain resilience aspect of what's coming in the future. And I really wanted to look back at our points around risks and opportunities. From the just transition in Nigeria, particularly our energy mix plan or strategy that's around the focus on gas, and moving away from PMS, specifically when it comes to major sources of energy. And then the digital responsibility and data privacy. Almost every organization, or whether you're big or small, has some materiality issues related to data responsibility, and even things like intellectual property. And those are going to become quite pressing in terms of the social issues that companies will be expected to report on, companies will be expected to have a strategy around, and companies will be expected to engage with actual performance indicators, not just with flowery reports or videos, but actual performance indicators. That's where most of these trends are going. So we encourage you, as you follow the series, to continue learning, take the opportunity as well, if you're in a role where you are actually responsible for documenting these issues, to also reiterate this back to management and those responsible for those outcomes, so that you actually have real performance to actually report on at the end of the day when you come to reporting, which as we've said, is going to be a competitive advantage when it comes to engaging with different stakeholders, particularly investors. So I'm going to stop here for now and open the Q&A so that we can have responses, not just from myself, but from the other speakers in the room. So Godfrey, you can take the slide down. And I will check the Q&A box for the questions. Okay.
Okay, so I think a couple of the attendees were unable to use the Q&A button. So we have some of the questions in the chat box, and I'll just go. Yes, I'll just go with the first one. So we have one from HD Sonok, and he says companies reporting social parameters SDG, GRI as per standards neat and clean, but in actual not real. How can reported parameters be audited and verified, involving stakeholders, not just using auditors' reports?
Okay, thank you. So I have a response to that, but I actually want to call the professional among us who does this, whose firm does this as a service, looking at assurance of said reporting on non-financial performance. So Isiri, do you want to answer this? And I can add if I...
Oh, sorry, I lost. What's the question, please?
All right, so the question is that companies are reporting social parameters, on SDGs, GRI, they're using the standards, and it looks quite neat, but it's not like there are suspicions that his question is that this is not actually real. So how can reported parameters be audited or verified, including the stakeholders, not just auditors' reports?
Yeah, so I think as we move ahead, the landscape is definitely going to change. The truth is that because this requires a lot of data and there is no uniform metrics for measuring, attainment of whatever it is, it's very subjective. I'd say that, because even when it comes to the materiality test as well, each organization will define materiality based on how they impact their society, which is different one organization to another, but then also internally, how it affects their bottom line as well, their financial performance. So you might find that sometimes in terms of the things that are material to report, it will be different from a Shell to a Chevron, even different to a company that's within the financial service industry. It makes it hard to then say, to what extent do we audit and to what extent do we on audit, if there's a word like that. But then again, standards like the IFRS are looking at streamlining, the areas that are important to report on as well. So there is some reprieve that may be coming through as we speak. Secondly, there's a lot of activity with benchmarking and rating organizations as well that are now pulling together all the information from these financial or non-financial statements to say, how are you ranking based on these indices that you have now identified as material. And those rating agencies are also pulling a lot of ground in terms of which organizations could potentially be looking at favorable investments over and above others. So the rating agencies reports as well is very useful in this space. And like I'll say, when you're doing these auditings, you know, it's down to the details, down to how you've identified those material subjects. But who uses the information depends on the stakeholder that's impacted by what you have reported as well. So it's a very wide space, but then narrowing down with some of these global standards that are coming up. And I think the assurance that is being given on these as we go will also change with time, but the field is definitely evolving.
Yes, thank you. And to add to that, like you said, it's evolving, and I think it's evolving quite fast. So if you look at the IFRS S1 and S2, one of the outcome when that people start using that to report more is that you will find us speaking the same language more in terms of reporting non-financial information. Although the IFRS is specifically targeted at communicating with investors, which is one stakeholder group, but it's trying to put a lot of the information into the same language in terms of numbers, in terms of investments.
Absolutely.
So it will become easier for us to compare across companies or even across sectors. And I know for Nigeria particularly, that's why this that was the preferred one to adopt in our context, because it then fits into the other standards we already have for traditional financial reporting by companies. So I hope that helps. It's a frustration that all of us in the sustainability space had, but I see that all the standards, even now with the interoperability going on with GRI and all these other standards, you're going to find that it's going to come together. We don't know if we're going to have one particular standard and then you can take any company's report and compare it with that. But since it's non-financial, like we said, there's still that room for subjectivity, but the standards are coming together and trying to put everybody within a particular lane so that it helps us know how to use this information. And then, like you said, there are other stakeholder groups, particularly rating agencies, even ESG rating groups, a lot more even coming into our context. So yes, I want to say that we're not yet where we want to be, but it's something that's already a moving trend when it comes to reporting on this. Godfrey, you want to read the next question since our Q&A is not working?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we had a question earlier. So it was two questions actually from Tosin. And the first question, he said, this question goes to the first speaker and said, the EIA Act of 2004 fails to truly capture SIA. How can individuals and organizations build capacity and competence in this exercise? Also, are there any consortium or associations developing something in legislation in this regard? So that's the first question. I don't know if you want to take that or I take both questions at once.
Okay, so he's asking about social impact assessment, similar to the way we have a regulatory framework for environmental impact assessments. I don't know, since I can't say the question on I want to be sure that you're reading up the question is what I've said.
Okay, no, so he was asking about, so he referenced an act, the EIA Act of 2004, fails to truly capture SIA. How can individuals and organizations build capacity and competence in this exercise? Also, are there any associations developing legislation in this regard?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any legislation, but there are professional associations, even internationally and across Africa, that focus on impact assessments, evolving from the environmental into the social. Some business schools and also other knowledge institutions also do training around social impact assessment, but it's one of the areas that has different frameworks. There's no specific regulation on how a company should carry out their social impact assessment, although there are different professional standards coming from the professional field of environmental impact assessment and then applying those same principles to the social. But like you said, the environmental laws in Nigeria specifically, we have the EIA, we have things like the extended producer responsibility regulation, looking at the lifespan of any product brought into the market and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you so much, Reva. So Tosin's second question was to Siri, and he said, how do we connect the S when we go from an organizational setting to a political standpoint, taking Nigeria as an example. So how can public and private organizations push S, that's social, into national policy and governance to inform national strategy?
Yeah, so I think this is a good place where public and private partnerships, would be assessed. And maybe I'll just use an example of one of the events that we did recently. It was championed as well with the Ford Foundation, where we were looking at the social impact that private organizations are making and how that would help us, for instance, in addressing the economic crisis that we currently face in the country. There is a coalition to be had between the public sector and the private sector if we're going to make any sense of these social impacts that private organizations are making. But the truth is that sometimes politics stands in the way of achieving that. I give an example where we had a major donor who was looking at building a road, but then the local government officials in that local government didn't want it to happen because they hadn't been settled, and they pretty much sabotaged that project. This is how politics can negatively impact what social good can be had by any private sector. And so the coalition at that point is, how do we start to set the regulatory framework around this kind of partnerships? How do we start to get data on the regions where we need to make the most impact so that we can still attain our SDGs? There is a beautiful story to be had where this kind of partnerships work. But unfortunately, we don't have very cohesive regulations that can guide, the journey on that mandate. A lot of advocacy needs to happen. A lot of conversations with the right public sectors and interventionists needs to happen as well. The politicians need to understand how this impacts the nation. They need to understand also how even the non-financial information in some of these private sector bodies affects the growth of our country as well. So a body needs to bring it together. And I like the fact that organizations like Ford Foundation and even Sterling are trying to make an effort in bridging that gap. Because as we do that, we can now start to dictate what the regulations might look like as well, but also dictate how the partnerships work so that we make the most impact where required, whether it's from philanthropists or impact donor and impact investors or private sector bodies and even the public sector, because at the end of the day, the public sector too has a deficit. In Nigeria, we're running on a budget deficit. All the funds we require to build roads, to build schools, to provide the right education that's coming from tax is nowhere to be seen. Our tax to GDP contribution is what, 6%, whereas in other jurisdictions we're looking at 18%. So there is a missing coalition, a missing partnership, and I think it's important that organizations that can push, that have the muscle to bridge that gap, start to come through so that we can start to develop also the practice notes that are required in this area and help also educate the politicians that bring some of this to life. Otherwise, we'll be stuck.
Thank you so much, Asiri, for that detailed response. I think we have another question here that says, are there specific ESG guidelines suitable for the hospitality or tourism sector? I think it's open to any of the speakers. So are there
what?
Are there specific ESG guidelines that are suitable for the hospitality or tourism sector?
That one, I don't know that there are, but we don't have, like I said, IFRS is still evolving. With the ESRS, we may be able to find specific industry outlooks that one can lean into. So maybe that can be a starting point.
Okay.
Yeah, and to add to that, so you may not find one guideline that says, okay, if you're running a business in your hospitality sector, these are the specific principles you have to follow. For most sectors that have been able to achieve some such kind of guiding, it's either led by industry groups or sometimes relying on sector standards developed by organizations like the GRI. But in the hospitality sector, specifically things like hotels, the things around green construction and green building, what you find is them looking for or using the elements of sustainability practices that are related to the different aspects of their operations and then applying it. So some hospitality groups actually target to achieve certain green standards when it comes to the efficiency of their building, the designs of their building, or even their use of consumable, their consumption patterns of resources. So if you go to some Radisson hotels, you would not find PET bottles in your hotel room. You would find glass bottles that would be refilled. So those kinds of things, they are just applying the circular economy principle into their own business, but there's not yet one standard across board, because even the hospitality sector is quite broad. There from lodging and accommodation to food to tourism and things like that. So you find that just like the materiality process in the implementation of any ESG strategy would identify that, okay, plastics is a major issue for this business. You find those kinds of elements showing up within hospitality businesses that are more sustainability and ESG conscious. And some of the international hospitality groups, and particularly, do have their strategies are public. They are there for even others to learn from, even though there's no sector agreed standards or principles. Some other sectors have, like if you look at the insurance sector, they have investment sector, which affects insurance, pension companies, asset managers. You have principles like the principles for responsible investing, which is championed by the global UN Global Compact, and I think the UN Environmental Program Financial Initiative. So there are some sectors that have actually grown that way and created some global principles that they can all abide by, but it's not across board. For academic institutions like ours, we have the principles for responsible management education, not principles for education in general. So it's something that applies specifically to business schools globally. So those are two examples I can give.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Siri. And so there's another question here that's actually interesting. So it says, the Climate Change Act of 2021 expressly required companies to have a sustainability desk. Now, the question is now, what is the role of the human resources in different organizations as it relates to the S in ESG? So in a similar fashion, where
Pedro wants to take that. I think Pedro explained that quite well in her presentation. Yes, and she's here, but it's quiet.
Thank you very much, Oreva. Yes, thank you very much, Oreva, and thank you, Godfrey, for that question. The sustainability desk is quite different from the human resources desk. The human resources team are responsible for all the employees within the organization. They are responsible for making sure that the employees are satisfied, that they are engaged, that there's diversity in the organization, there's equity, there's inclusion. Those are the responsibilities of the human resources personnel. If I'm going to just quickly share my slide and go back to that particular slide. I had mentioned that the human resources team or officer or team lead, they're responsible for the employee well-being, conversations around health insurance, conversations around job satisfaction, conversations around equitable remuneration, conversations around ensuring increased productivity, conversations around remote work, conversations around flexible time, flexible place, anything and everything to make the employee happy, employee engaged, employee satisfied, anything to make your organization be the top talent attraction. That is the responsibility of human resources team. The sustainability team can take care of conversations around climate emissions, the environment part actually of the ESG. And I believe that that answers your question. I actually did give a case study of what Sterling Bank had done when it comes to new mothers. So as a new mother, you had free creche for your child up to 18 months. And for those that have been mothers in the room, especially first-time mothers, you know that that is a very, very heavenly provision, especially when you know that some of these questions are really, really far from your office, and at times you cannot guarantee what they're doing. But this question is actually very close to the office, and you can actually just walk down to check up on your child. Those are the responsibilities of the human resources personnel or the human resources team or human capital team, depending on what you call it in your organization. And I don't know if there's any other question on that, or if Esiri or whoever want to add one thing or two to what I just shared.
Yeah, I wanted to add something by kind of bringing a metaphor. So just like you have a finance team in an organization, they are responsible for implementing the entire organization's financial control, the budget for operation for the year. But every different unit usually has their own budget, and they are reporting on that, they're tracking that. It's even a performance indicator for the director or the heads of such units. So sustainability is kind of the same. You do need a person or a role or a function within your organization that is responsible for managing the implementation of the sustainability strategy. And typically that's the sustainability desk or sustainability team. But you find that the actual implementation of all those ESG elements, it will apply to different units. So when it comes to the sustainability issues that affect employees, the human resources unit is still the one who will champion this. Typically, sustainability leads have to provide support, have to contribute to the strategy or the initiatives that the HR team comes up with, have to even give them best practice information, sometimes even organize trainings about how these kinds of initiatives will be implemented and how they can track that it's actually adding value to the organization and eventually adding to the achievement of the organization's long-term purpose and goals. So think of the sustainability desk as the financial control desk. And then everybody within the organization is still implementing sustainability as far as related to their own process or part of the business. Siri, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I hope that
Thank you,
helps.
Thank you, Reva.
Yeah.
I think that yes, Siri.
No, I think spot on, actually. It's that overarching responsibility that the sustainability leader has to then connect, because at the end of the day, sustainability is not isolated. You need to work with every other division within the organization to make it make sense. Because what is going to happen is that business models will evolve from start to finish. If you're looking at circular economy as an instance, how do you interpret circular economy across the entire organization? It's not just for the sustainability team, but it will run from even how you innovatively design the products to how you distribute and market them, to how you also reward the staff, that potentially will be working on that, whether they have certain KPIs that are sustainability driven as well. Everyone needs to work collaboratively, so that the sustainability person definitely drives that across the entire organization. Should not be seen as working in isolation. So he would also work with the HR person. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Asiri. I think we have just 12 more minutes, so we'll only be able to take 2 more questions. And we had a question from Bosron, and he said, how and what are the measures and approaches to ensure quantitative measurement and assessment of social impact in different organizations? So how do we ensure measurement? I think there was also another question that spoke to how do we verify accuracy of some of the impact numbers being reported by organizations. So maybe we can just take both questions as one.
Siri, do you want to go? Since I can add after you respond, since he mentioned the second speaker.
Hello. Sorry, I lost you. What was I supposed to speak on, please?
Okay, so I think the question was just generally around accuracy and authenticity of social impact numbers being reported by different organizations. How do we ensure that organizations are reporting the right numbers, both qualitative and quantitative numbers?
Yeah. So, what we need really is a reporting framework that moves from defining the objectives, targets, and impact indicators within organizations down to how we even collect the data, how we analyze it, and how we're also engaging our stakeholders. So stakeholder engagement. The thing is that it's not just about now just saying I donated to this community. It's also about pulling it down to the impact that that donation is making in the society, but even what's the source of the data. So your typical assurance team will look at that entire process to be sure that, the way you're collecting the data, the way you have underlined it with the objectives and the targets for the organization all makes sense from cradle to grave. And that's the process that's being assured and reported on in the non-financial information. So, we started out with identifying what might be material for organizations as well, so that you can frame that discussion and also frame what needs to be reported as well. But then there are standards that are also used to assess what has been reported. And some of those standards we looked at were under the ASRS, which definitely would also drive what we may be seeing under the IFRS. So a lot of work for the assurance person is to look at that entire reporting framework and then to start to tailor it for the organization that's reporting to make it make sense. So you would see notes similar to what you're seeing in financial statement information that say, these give a true and fair view. But like we said, you can't just use a broad brush to just sweep it and say, oh, this person has reported well. It has to be looked at within also the organization's reporting objectives and targets. And then secondly, we said that there is no unified reporting framework just yet. This space is evolving and it will take some time to get there where we're all speaking the same language. But the IFRS is kind of pruning it down to say, let's look at it from the lens of the investors, so that we have a meaningful way of comparing one organization to the other. So the starting point will definitely be, what's the strategy? What are the material items? What has been reported? Does it make sense? Can we review those data points? Where are you collecting the data from? And then we can test and prove that yes, it's correct, and then certify that annual report does make sense. So those are some of the things that you'll see. But then I said the standards are definitely evolving, so we'll see a lot more guidance in that space.
Awesome. Thanks, Asiri. Oreva, I don't know if you have any additions.
Can I say something about the part 2?
Yes, please.
Yes, I wanted to say something about the part 2 part of his question, which was, on what are quantitative approaches. So one thing that is happening, and you find companies that have sustainability really tied to their strategy are doing now, is they're also creating impact targets at the beginning of the strategy cycle. It's something that it's a principle that most nonprofit organizations are used to. So when they are starting any program, especially if that is a social intervention, or we want to have this particular impact in terms of teachers or education or student outcomes, you are setting those goals at the beginning. So for business executives, now you're approving a particular amount for your social initiatives within your sustainability strategy, and you have your particular 3 or 4 thematic focus areas that everybody's going to implement around. You have to set some goals that they have to achieve, such that from the beginning of those implementation, even when they are engaging partners, it's clear what the goal, the goal is, where the end of the race is. So for example, I have to give an example to make this real. So if it's an intervention that's around youth unemployment, for example, specific things at the beginning of the strategy of, okay, this is how many youths we want to reach. This is where those youths should be from. This is the kind of skills we want to give them. So that at the end of the day, when you're reporting on how you have achieved this, if you look at some of the companies in the food and beverage industry, particularly, who have very strong material issues around things like plastic waste pollution because of the packaging which they sell their products, they actually have those commitments in their strategy. And even if you go to their website, not just even in their sustainability reports, as part of what they are telling investors, they're saying, oh, I'm going to achieve this amount of profit this year. I'm targeting to also achieve this amount of waste recollection or plastic material recollection as part of our manufacturing value chain. So setting those goals is what's becoming a good way to do that. And GRI in particular is working on implementing that into the reporting standards to help companies set their impact goals and then be able to report on it at the end of the year or 2 years or 3 years, or whatever the strategy cycle is. So that helps with the trying to get quantitative data out of all these S issues.
Awesome, Reva. Thank you so much for the response, for the additional response to the question. I know I had said we would have some time for maybe 2 questions, but I think the question we just attended to now, responded to, would be the last. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. And it was interesting that as part of the questions, someone had asked about how organizations can, beyond just what organizations are doing, how we can make, would I say, bring the social side of things to the front burner. And that's something that we at Sterling One Foundation have already started. We've taken that up and we're championing that. And what I'm currently sharing my screen to show us the summit that we have. We launched in 2022. It's called the Africa Social Impact Summit. And it basically just convenes everyone, brings together on one platform everyone from the public down to the private sector, as well as the civil society, government, international donor organization, the international investment community, all in one place, all on one platform to discuss all these key issues that we have shared today. We have talked about different elements of different things. We've talked about the social impact side of things. We've talked about it from sustainability, from HR. All of these conversations, all of these are plans that go on at the Africa Social Impact Summit. This year we'll be having the 3rd edition of the summit, and it's going to be holding July 25th down to July 26th, 2024, here in Lagos, Nigeria, the ECO Convention Center. So it's also interesting that the first ESG roundtable, this conversation, this ESG series that we're having today, was an offshoot from the summit. So we had the first ESG roundtable at the 2nd edition of the summit last year, and we found the need to educate more people, not just private sector organizations, but also have this knowledge sharing opportunities for people across government, people across civil society organizations. And it's interesting to see the impact that that's already making. So we welcome everyone to register. You can register for the summit at www.theimpactsummit.org. So www.theimpactsummit.org, and would look forward to welcoming you in July as we have even deeper conversations around, borrowing the words of the person who asked the question, how we can make this social impact, how we can make everything around social mainstream across not just Nigeria or not just one country in Africa or one country doing it well, but across the continent so that we can accelerate action on the SDGs. So once again, I want to thank all our speakers. I want to thank our partners, the UNIDO-ITPO office. I want to thank Sterling Bank. I want to thank the LCCI. I want to thank NECA and PwC. I want to also thank the Lagos State Sustainability Center for helping us put together this exciting opportunity to share knowledge with the different experts in the room. And we do hope that everyone here would go back to implement the different things that they have learned from today's session. So once again, thank you so much. As we promised, the slides and the recording of this session will be shared to everyone who registered and everyone who participated. So once again, we look forward to welcoming you in July for yet another session on ESG and other key sustainability issues. And the next time we meet, Until the next time we meet, we hope that you continue to create impact, you continue to do great work at your various organizations. Thank you very much to everyone.